Okay, starting the recording, perfect. So good afternoon. Thank you to those who've joined live and anyone watching. I hope you're interested in this webinar on lesson planning. So we'll begin and there'll be a question and answer section at the end as well. So to start off with lesson planning, we are going to talk about the masterclass and how to interpret the syllabus and determine, the number of lessons you need to be planning out for your entire semester or like per unit, and then talking about tailoring lessons later on after that to fit the proficiency level of your students, like how you can take the content from the masterclass and make it a bit easier or make it a bit harder. Like how are we going to make those small kind of adjustments to tailor it to our students? We're going to talk about the lesson stages. So a lot of people are pretty familiar with this, but we'll just provide a bit of detail and some context there. And then we'll get into some example lesson plans. Depending on the time we have, we may go through some. I've developed a couple lesson plans on the same kind of topic just to see how you can use the same information in a few different ways, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Then we've got a few preempted frequently asked questions here with some extra information for consideration, which I'm sure maybe be applicable to a few different teachers, and then anyone in the chat as well, if you'd like to join us with a question and we'll answer at the end. That's perfectly fine. We can have a good discussion there. So we'll continue along. Feel free to message in the chat at any point in time if you have any questions. We'll get to that there. Okay. Now, the masterclass, starting off with that, and most importantly, looking at the syllabus. So we want to build a lesson plan. We want to plan our lessons out. We want to be organized, prepared going into our classes. But before we can plan for a single lesson, we should actually determine how that fits in holistically with the whole plan for the rest of the unit and for the rest of the quarter or term. Right, so we need to actually figure out what we're going to be doing for this lesson and then the next lesson and the lesson after that and how it all fits together. Right? We need to interpret the syllabus. So we'll open up the syllabus, and as an example, we're going to be doing one for English Basic B1+. Just happens to be one of the more popular courses that our teachers here do. But even if you're teaching another language, you're teaching science or math or ICT or maybe some of the additional subjects, you can still apply some of the things we're talking about today. Okay, so let's get into the syllabus and have a bit of a look at that. Where do we find our syllabus, first of all? So it's in our masterclass. Our masterclass, you should be already enrolled into your masterclass. It's our academic resources. You'll see that on your Google Classroom. You can look under like Math Basic over here if you're doing M1 or M2 and so forth. You'll only have the subjects for all the masterclasses for the subjects and year levels that you teach. So when you actually click into one of these, so let's say we click onto this one, you'd actually see your syllabus typically right up the top. You may see some pre-test, post-test. You'll also see the publisher platform. So this could be MEE or Spark for English, it could be Connect Ed for math or science. If you're doing a more like obscure or additional style subject, you may not have a platform to use, but that's okay. You've actually still pulled out, the academic team still pulled out all the resources you need into the masterclass, which is the next part down here. So Unit 1 here would be operations with integers for this particular M1 class. So that's your unit content. It's resources from the publisher, some slide guides, so we'll talk a little bit more about that, and some just examples. Now, each masterclass may look a little bit different, but generally speaking, you're going to have a syllabus and you're going to have some content to teach, and that's what makes it most of it. So that's where we find our syllabus, so let's open up that first of all. And we're going to use this one as an example, English Basic B1+, which is our Unit 6. We're going to look at Unit 6 for cool gadgets. All right. And this is supposed to be completed between week 6 and 9. So that's actually something that's coming up for these teachers who are dealing with this one. Now, we must interpret it. So what's actually going on here? This is what it says for Unit 6, right here on this section here. We've got that we need to complete for Unit 6. Now, if we start to break that down, we can actually separate that into vocabulary, which are these green ones, and the grammar, which are the red ones. And then we've actually got 4 sections for different language skills as well. So 2 vocabulary, 2 grammar, and 4 language skills. And then you've got a test at the end, which you have to complete. Now, we can see that it says vocabulary there, and that's how we've got our information. Now, different language skills, and this is important, we've got reading, speaking, skip listening over here, and we've got writing. So we've got those four. We'll come back to those in a bit more detail in the next slides. Now, because we've got 4 weeks to complete it in, and we have 3 periods per week, as demonstrated by, it should be on the masterclass itself or within that syllabus section. It'll say how many periods per week you're teaching. You'd also sort of have an idea of that anyway. You've got 12 periods essentially to complete this. That's the goal, is what we're trying to say here. Now, it may not actually look like that though, so we'll go and interpret it a little bit further. We said we've got 12 periods because we've got 4 weeks and 3 periods per week, but because we're working in Thailand, we're possibly going to have some public holidays or some random cancellations for school events that bring out, school pride and school culture, or maybe some sort of ceremony for national pride or the royal family or something like that. So there's always going to be some sort of event going on, as we know. So it's always good to plan for that so that you're not behind schedule. So let's wipe out 2 from that 12 already, and then let's also take out 1 for the end of unit test, of course. So we can't be teaching in that same period. And then let's also give the students 1 review lesson for that test. So we're actually going to end up with about 8 periods for content, let's say. And that's pretty well lucky, because here we've got 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, 6.4, etc., all the way down to 6.8, and we can divide that into the 8 remaining sessions. Now, if you don't happen to have any cancellations, you may get those periods back, and that's fantastic. That means you can do a good amount of review or some additional kind of practice work for their test, which would be a good opportunity for them to get a good understanding of the content you've gone over already. All right, so let's say we're going to cover all of this in 8 periods, then plus the test on top of that, and the review, of course. Now, once we've decided we've got 8 periods, and we're thinking about dividing up our lesson plans, we need to actually look at the proficiency level of our students. So how capable are they, and how should we plan these lessons out? So that's when we're talking about tailoring our lessons, depending on the proficiency level of your students. So now, newer teachers can ask their manager and or colleagues if they don't know their students' proficiency level yet. So you might already have been told, like, oh, you've gone to a prestigious school, or you're going to more of a lower socioeconomic school or something like that, or whatever the performance level is at. You may have been told that, or maybe you've been working here for a while and you want to look at the way you're doing lesson plans, and you may want to adjust that accordingly. So we essentially have 3 categories: approaching level, which is kind of low level; on level, which is like your average student; and the beyond level, which is a higher level student, very proficient. Now, for an approaching level or low level student, the unit content will need to be scaffolded appropriately. What I mean by that is saying, if you're going to teach them about a certain grammar topic, or maybe if you're doing maths or science, you're teaching them about a scientific concept or a math equation, you need to be able to step up or provide steps to their objective of learning a certain equation or learning a certain grammar, or the vocabulary, or whatever it is they're learning, in such small steps that it's easy enough for them to make progress from one step to the next. If you don't provide those small steps, then they're going to get lost trying to do one big step at a time. Whereas if you didn't do as much scaffolding for a beyond level student, they may be able to jump that distance of understanding a lot easier, because they're at a higher level, and they're, I guess, more capable of learning in that context. So making sure for your low level, you simplify the key parts of the textbook, or the key parts of your unit content that you're teaching. So really determining what's sort of key. So we're going to be looking at like the vocabulary, and we're going to be looking at the specific grammar, right? And then hitting all the language points for our example, the English comms. Now, making it as simple as possible. And then once you've got them understanding the bare bones, the actual real basics, then you can sort of step it up a little bit if you've got time. But sometimes you just have to cut the fat and just go with the simplest explanation or the simplest definition and give them the key parts of that, just so that they can reach the thing. That's an approaching level. Now, students on level, the unit content should be challenging enough. They shouldn't be you shouldn't be required to make things more advanced. You don't necessarily need to reduce the level of difficulty based on what's on the textbook. There may be some adjustments you need to do because the content may be more directed towards westernized young students or native English speakers, whereas you might need to make some adjustments to fit our Thai students. But in the general context, the on-level students should find the unit content or the textbook content on about the right level, for their education to be challenged at that certain level. So what you can do instead is use that unit content, use that textbook, and add your own personal flair to it. So change up some of the different activities that you do, but still following that textbook as a guide. Now, this is a good point for me to sort of point out that we do have a lot of academic resources within BFITS in our master classes and so forth. We've got a lot of slides and like example test questions, and the textbook for those core subjects as well. So these resources are all there. We've even got the publisher login for more resources beyond what's in the actual initial masterclass. And it's a matter of being able to interpret that and deciding how you want to play around with that. And we'll talk more about that coming up soon. Now for your beyond level students, they, whether this is because just how they are naturally, or the school is considered prestigious and they want to push their students to that extra level, these students will require some sort of creative opportunity to use the unit content. You still need to cover that unit content, but maybe because of their proficiency level, they're able to pick it up quicker, or they're already like maybe close to native English speakers, depending on the school you're at, and that you need to maybe find ways that they can use this information in a creative sense, right? So you need to potentially enrich the unit content with deeper meaning for these beyond level students. And again, we'll provide some examples of that coming up. Yeah. So there's your different levels. Have a bit of a think about what you think your students are at, and therefore how you may need to adjust the content. Now, if we're going to do a bit of a unit overview for our approaching level or our low-level students, the vocabulary and the grammar are the key parts of any English unit, right? So you really want to be learning the vocabulary, so the green parts here, and the grammar, which are the red parts. So that's what we really want to be doing. The language skills, which are in blue, are more like generic, and we have been provided a textbook and slides and activities and so forth from our masterclass, from the publisher, from the academic team, that take these language skills and gives it a context. So for example, for this particular one, Cool Gadgets Unit 6, for reading, there's future tech and online articles. So they have to read an online article, okay, for that skill, to practice their reading skill, right? Now, for an approaching level student, instead of adding in more different terms, different contexts in which they have to learn alongside the reading skill, what you can do is you can actually practice the language skill with the vocab and grammar instead of the respective textbook section. So instead of introducing things about AI, podcasts and interviews and online articles, instead of comparing and contrasting photos of virtual reality, you can practice these skills by linking it with something else. So we're going to get them to speak the grammar and context, have done something, gerunds and infinitives, right? So we're going to get them to speak these out. So we're getting them to practice this more. So this slower approach means you can actually get rid of all this other content and double up on your grammar and your vocabulary content by pairing it with some of the language skills. So that way, this new vocabulary that they're learning in green, there's new grammar points that they're learning or practicing in red, they're actually still practicing these language skills, but they're doing it with the same content rather than creating new content to practice those skills. So slower approach to learning the vocab and the grammar, because you get to do it twice essentially, but the next time you do it, you're essentially focusing on that language skill, if that makes sense. So cutting out the fat of the extra content which you don't necessarily need to cover, because at the end of the day, you're trying to practice the skill and you're trying to give them the vocab and the grammar. So really just focusing on the key points. So that's a way to help with the schools that or the students that are sort of at a lower level. Okay. Now, if we're looking at an on-level group of students, the average, you can actually still be using this textbook to help manage your workload. So don't just think, oh, because they're on level, now I can just go and find other things online. Still use the resources that we've got, right? And try use those resources to just reduce the amount of work you have. There's going to be some good parts in the textbook that work with your teaching style, so take them out, use those, right? Don't just make everything from scratch. Pick and choose the parts that you think work for you and that makes sense. Some exercises in the textbook, they're not going to make sense for your students, and that's fine. You can get rid of that, chop that out, and get something in instead that you think would be more appropriate. Okay, whatever's better for your students and the way that you teach. Now, if we actually were to look at vocab 1, so this 6.1 here, it actually has 53 terms to learn. But because of the terms that it is talking about, so it's like talking about like smart TV, you're probably going to know what a smart TV is. A lot of these students, not all of them, but a lot of them will have a smart TV in their classroom. Things like that. You may decide that 53 terms is quite a lot, or maybe because it's so familiar, you think they can still do it in the one lesson. So you still teach the 6.1, 6.2, 6.3. Or you might want to mix it up with English. You do have a lot of flexibility in how you do it, as long as you're sort of covering all these points, right? But you may want to spread it into multiple lessons because it is quite a lot of different terms that you want to make sure that they're understanding. So you might want to, instead of comparing and contrasting photos of virtual reality, you combine vocab 1 with developing speaking. So you have 2 lessons on vocab 1, and you're also practicing your speaking at the same time, because you're getting to have conversations with that vocabulary. So you can sort of chop and change that. As long as you're getting them to practice these skills and you're teaching them that vocabulary and those grammar points in that unit, then you're okay. Okay? Don't just go randomly doing something from a different unit because you think your students already know this, right? You still have to go over it. And that leads us on to the mid-level students who potentially know quite a lot already. So beyond level students learn more quickly, or may learn quickly, and have existing knowledge, but they may still have gaps in their understanding. And that's the same for native English speaking students as well. Like, it's not just because they're Thai or like, not native English speakers that they might have gaps. Everyone has gaps potentially. And that's why we have to make sure we cover all the content still. So don't just go and decide, oh, I'm going to do something completely different on gadgets. You still need to make sure they know all these different terms. We'll get an example. Now, schools that teach at a higher level, for example, teaching this B1 plus in M2 instead of M3, and I believe another school even teaches it in M1 instead of M3, which is quite a jump. Now, they've already kind of adjusted the content or the level of the content for the proficiency of their students. So in a way, they've already modified how difficult it needs to be for these students. So if they've already made that change, potentially you don't actually need to make your lesson even more in-depth and creative and difficult, because they may be already being challenged for their age level already because their school's accelerated. Having said that, you know your students best, right? So you should be able to make that determination of what you think will be challenging for them. Just remember not to make too many assumptions about what kind of gaps they may or may not have, and make sure you cover all the content. Now, I've highlighted this developing speaking here because a lot of schools that consider themselves prestigious tend to like to emphasize particular language skills. So they may want you to do more speaking, or they may want you to do more writing or reading or listening, whatever it is. Depending on the year, there could be a different flavor, or it could just be a school has a particular emphasis on one. Regardless of what it is, you need to follow with their requirements. So if they're saying, we want to teach more speaking, so teach more speaking. You might have to maybe sacrifice a bit here and there with maybe some of the other language skills if they really want you to really boost up their speaking. Or alternatively, because they are beyond level students, you don't have to add extra content or extra depth into this. Instead, what you might like to do is let them go through all of these as normal, but every single lesson you're going to be developing some speaking as well, right? And that way you get to actually put more into it than you would for an on-level group of students, if that makes sense. So pushing them to develop their speaking, if that's something that the school wants, and there are a few schools like that. So now a teacher could easily put some more depth into this by changing the order. So like instead of just following out of the textbook, maybe getting some different ideas of how to use these called gadgets information and coming up with the activities themselves. We'll get into that shortly. I'm just going to continue along for now. Okay. So we're going to talk about the lesson stages before we get into the lesson planning parts, just too quickly. So first of all, you've seen some sort of similar lesson plan template like this. Now, this is just one of the templates we have. They're all fairly similar, and this is like just a recommended stage that we sort of go through. We'll talk about these stages individually. But this is what you might have. You put your lesson that you're teaching, the date, subject, the year level, a specific objective of what they're supposed to be able to complete based on what you're teaching them, and any essential vocabulary that you want them to be learning as well. Any particular tricky words can be put in there as well. Then we'll talk about the lesson stages. So all of these, you've got the estimated time or the recommended time for this lesson of how long to spend on these stages. The idea being you want to give them as much independent practice as possible, less direct instruction, webinar / lecture style. You don't want to be talking about them the whole time. It's good for them to practice what they're learning so they can learn properly, especially for the young kids. Now, with this teacher and student section here, either one of these, it's basically you can be writing what the teacher should be doing during this stage. So if they're circulating around the room, checking and supporting students, checking in on homework, if they're asking students to volunteer, if they're cold calling students to answer a question, following the slides, providing a handout, and maybe the students are taking notes, they're asking questions, they're participating in a game, they have to do like a turn and talk for 30 seconds with their partners, that sort of thing. So whatever they have to do should be sort of included in there. And all of that should be kind of dictated by the slides, but we'll get into that into another webinar. And down here, you've got to have your links to your slides, your printouts, anything that's going to be used in the lesson, so that if you are away doing a visa run, absent for whatever other reason, that someone can come in and substitute for you and be as effective as you would or as close to as possible in that lesson. All right, so that's a typical template. Now, we'll go into this just briefly about the different stages. So you do now. The idea is we start off with a 3 to 5 minute activity that can be completed while the teacher circulates. So the students can go ahead and start working on that straight away, and the teacher can set up the class, get it all ready. If they've got activities around the room, maybe setting up some stations, they can do that, and then the teacher can go and check in, make sure everyone's on track. You can essentially, within the do now, you can introduce today's content, like tease with a riddle or like a question, or get them to sort of think creatively or with reason. Or you could use it as an opportunity to revise previous lessons. So you could be revising grammar points, you could be revising maths questions that you did, or some definitions from science, or something like that, right? It's great for building anticipation for the lesson ahead, though. So if you don't want to do the revising, if you feel like you want them to be energized for what you're about to teach, great opportunity to do some sort of riddle or brain teaser or something to catch their attention at the start of the day. High energy and fun activities are great for Kratom, for kids, for the younger kids, to get them excited and interested in the lesson. So those are always good opportunities. You might want to still get your students excited and all that, but you basically, like your older level, your Matayom students, but it may look a little bit different. We might be teasing their brain more so than getting them up physically, depending on the year level and the class. Now, once you've done do now, you've stuck to your timer, briefly review it and then move on. I'll put these points over here. So predictable, students should know where to find the do now. So whether it's a piece of paper that someone hands out to everyone, they could get the students to help you, or whether it's on Google Classroom all the time and they just have to go there, or it's a question from their textbook and you've got like a visual reminder. Visual reminders can be very helpful. So this just basically says, open up your textbook to page 46. So something like that can be useful. So you plug that in straight away and you see it, they know where to go. The task has to be achievable. It can't be too difficult for them to complete and require your assistance. So they need to be able to do it on their own or in pairs, however you've assigned. Right, let's keep moving. So your I do, also known as your presentation or your direct instruction phase. The teacher is providing information to the students. Now that could be from slides, it could be from the book, could be from some other fashion, but it typically looks like a lecture or like a facilitated discussion. The teacher's talking at them a lot of the time. Now, this is where you usually break down concepts into small steps in simple language. Remember to, even for beyond level students, but you want to scaffold, not just for the approach level, but make sure that they understand every single step so that if they get lost somewhere along the way, they can make their way back down the steps and find the step that they got lost at and start again and find their way to the next step and so forth. Now, you also want to demonstrate how the students should be using the new information that you're teaching them. So if you've got maths equations or you've got grammar points or something like that, show them some examples of how to do it or what to do in these different scenarios. Right? And you want to include them as much as possible. It's no good just talking at them the whole time, because students' attention, you know how they are. They just don't want to necessarily listen to you unless you can find ways to include them in the conversation. Ask for some volunteers, get them to ask questions, cold call on them, get them to actually respond to you, or have some sort of reward system in place to help with that. We'll talk more about that kind of stuff in another webinar. But yeah, get them included in the discussion. Now, are they taking notes? Right, that's important. So are they taking notes? They need information to be able to study later. If they're just listening to you, by the time they get to the next class, they've already forgotten. And if they didn't write it down somewhere, if they don't have a reference material like your slides, if you don't share your slides with them, they don't take notes, how are they going to remember anything? So making sure they've got some sort of written information they can access at any time. Okay? And physically taking notes also just helps with forming memories. So that's also helpful. Now, about inclusion, it's very good to build that into your slides. So if you've got a question you want to ask to check, concept check questions. So, okay, we just discussed something on cool gadgets, and then we ask them, okay, so what is the function of this gadget? And then you target a question at one of the students. So you're actually checking for that information, but you can actually build that into the slide so that you don't forget. You don't have to have that mental pressure of remembering that all the time. Now that's just a sort of handy trick for some newer teachers who will just sort of need to be guided more, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone can do it. So build it into the slide. Build those concept check questions into the slides so you don't have to think of it on the fly. Now your we do stage, also known as your guided practice or just practice. This is where students practice the new content with assistance from the teacher. They walk through each step with the students, or you walk through each step with the students, and at different proficiency levels. There's no point just asking the smartest kid in the room, oh, what's the answer to this question? And then they answer it, and then you think you're all good, right? You need to be able to maybe as you talk about the initial basics of what you're talking about, ask one of the lower level students, and then they can help them, guide them, and get them to the correct answer. As you get something more advanced, ask a more mid-level student so they can be challenged as well. And then when you get onto a real tricky one, that's when you want to ask your standout students so that they can, have an opportunity to be challenged and to think as well. And that goes hand in hand with scaffolding. So start simple, then increase difficulty, okay? And get students involved at different levels. And this whole process here helps you evaluate how ready students are for the next stage of the lesson. So how ready they are to work in groups or by themselves. If you're asking them questions as you're presenting and the information is right there on the board and they still can't answer you, it may mean you need to go back and simplify the concepts a little bit more, and then you can proceed forward again. So just keep that in mind. It's a good way to evaluate on the fly. And as you ask them to answer questions, just be supportive, be patient. You know the answer because you're the subject matter expert. You're the one who's teaching this subject. So if it's about how to do a maths equation or it's about what this means, let them speak. Like, don't try to talk over them. Let them have an opportunity of trying to answer. Give them that opportunity and give them praise for having a go at the very least, or for getting it correct, or for whatever they're doing. Just praise them so they feel good about having that attempt. All right. Now, so this is production phase, or also known as independent practice, an activity that doesn't require the teacher's assistance, right? It can be individual, it can be group work, either one, right? Students basically will consolidate their learning. Actually, this is when they'll put it into practice and learn it and actually keep it in their memory, right? When they're actually doing stuff for themselves on their own. Yeah. So the idea is you want to make it fun, so they're more likely to do it, and therefore more likely to remember. And practical as well. So you're getting them to do something rather than something incredibly, boring and dull. Now, they need direction on what to be doing. So you can't just say, all right, go do this. So you need to provide them an idea of what the objective is, so how they're going to complete it, so what they need to complete, and also how they're going to complete it. So step it out, 1, 2, 3 steps if you need to do it, if you need to explain that. If you say just go and fill out this textbook, well, have you explained what the questions from the textbook are asking? Right? Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Just based on the way you've taught, maybe it doesn't line up with exactly how the questions from the textbook are actually laid out. Maybe there's a little bit of a discrepancy there, and they need that understanding and that link between what you've taught and how you've taught, and what the question is looking like in that textbook or in your worksheet or whatever activity you've got planned. Now, because they're able to do this independently of you, you're able to circulate, go around the room and support your students, check in on anyone to see if they're working, follow up for missing work. It's always good to continue to follow up for missing work because students love to get away with it sometimes. So checking in with the students, ticking off what they've done, and helping them proceed with it, making sure they're on task, all that standard good stuff. All right, now exit ticket, final sort of part here. Basically a quick task that helps you assess how well students learned the lesson content. It can be 1 or 3 questions to help you check to see if you met the objectives, see if your gut feeling aligns with the data. So what that means is if you give them 1 or 3 questions and they all get it correct, and your gut feeling was saying, yeah, they knew exactly what they're doing, and they got it all correct, then yeah, it's correct. If you thought, yeah, I taught that really well, that was a really great lesson, and then they can't answer 1 or 2 questions, then you're probably thinking, hey, maybe my gut feeling was a little bit wrong there. And usually after experience, you get that aligned to reality, which is always good. Now, it's good for students to reflect on what new knowledge they've gained or where they potentially still need clarity. So they could fill this out on a piece of paper. They could fill it online, like on Google Classroom. They could do it on like a word cloud kind of website, something like that. However you want, they can sort of provide that answer. as long as you've got the information to look at, so you can basically do a little bit of reflection of your own lesson to see how it went. And then you need to take some action. So maybe you need to reteach something at the start of the next lesson just to make sure that they understand. So maybe you scrap the do now for that next lesson and decide, oh, okay, I need to actually properly make sure they understand this. So I'll go through a guided example with them first thing next lesson or something like that. You know, like just adjusting to make sure that they do understand it and that you can proceed on to the next bit of knowledge you're going to give them. Maybe you're just going to, maybe it wasn't too bad, so you're just going to adjust any future plans for that content so that next time that content's taught, the next teacher, whether it's you or someone else, should be able to make sure that they've considered this, that the students may find this part difficult or whatnot. So that's basically your lesson plan status. Now that's a typical template. You don't have to follow that, right? So you might have some independent practice in the middle, and then you might look at doing some guided practice at the end. So you're giving them an opportunity to work on their own and try to figure it out for themselves. And then you work with them to see how that actually happens as part of like so how they actually do it, you know, and giving them the information behind how it works and so forth. Really good way you can flip it, like you can totally reverse the situation. Great for like science as well. Like if you've got an interesting concept, so you get them to do an experiment first before even teaching them the content, and then you go to explaining about the content with them and getting their sort of input and their questions and their thoughts on it, and then you teach the actual theory behind it. So it's sort of that's a good way to do some lessons. So this is not just a strict lesson plan, but it's a good template to start off with for structure if you're unsure of how to go about it. Then some overall considerations. So I do mention this here. Your slides should inform how the lesson is taught. So you've got some timers to keep you on track for certain activities. You've got concept check questions built into the slides. You've got activity instructions inside the slides so that they can see the activity, they can see the instructions as they're doing the work, and so they can look up and just clarify what they need to do if they need to. I'll probably still ask you anyway, but you can point them to the slides and show them where it is. Now, every lesson must allow students to discuss and or work with their peers. You can't just be speaking at them the whole time and then get them to do individual work. They need to interact with each other. They want to interact with each other. So you've got to find a way to make that work for you, because that's what they want to do. That's where they're going to get enjoyment out of it. So find a way for them to connect with each other. Now, plan lesson objectives to ensure all unit content is completed in time according to the syllabus. So it's planning holistically, right? You want to make sure you complete everything. You may have some classes cancelled here and there, and that's why that flexibility has to come into it as well. You need to be able to make sure you can get through the content. So a good thing to do is, like, if you're not sure if you're going to have the full lesson or if you're going to have a bit less, or how quickly you're going to get through the content, it's always good to have an activity that they can practice for like an undefined amount of time. So they can do these, like if you give them a worksheet and it's just got 5 questions, once they've done the 5 questions done, like they can't do any more, you don't have any more. But if you give them something more to practice, rather than just completing a certain task, then they can practice that over and over and over for more than 10 minutes, more than 20 minutes if they wanted to. And that's you know, pushing it for time limits. But or if you don't have the whole lesson, maybe you're running a bit slower, something will interrupt the class. If you give them an activity that they can practice, but they only have like 5 minutes to practice instead of 10 or instead of 20, then they still manage to practice without necessarily saying, oh, I only got 2 out of 5 questions done. So finding practice opportunities that have undefined minutes of completion is a good way to go. Now, this part here, very important. Whatever you have as part of your lesson plan, turn it into a routine so they understand what's going to happen. That predictability of knowing that we're going to have a do now at the start, the teacher's going to ask us a riddle, or the teacher's going to ask us to do this. And then during the teacher's lecture, they're going to ask like cold call, and they're going to ask this student this, that, and they're going to do this sort of activity later on. it creates that safe space because they can predict what's going to happen and they feel comfortable with it. It's when the unknown comes into play that they sort of get a little bit unsure. So that routine helps with that positive learning environment there. All right, now let's continue on to some example plans. I won't be able to go into great detail here because we are limited with time, but we'll see what we can get done. I will post all my plans online so people can have a bit of a look anyway. And remember, there's many different ways to do your lessons. It's just how can we take this information from the masterclass? So first of all, let's look at the approaching level. Right, approaching level. So it's a lot of vocabulary. This is everything that's supposed to be done in 6.1 or 6-1. That's a lot. It was 53 terms, wasn't it? So that's it's quite difficult to do in one lesson unless you're already sort of familiar with some of this. So they probably, they might know what a games console is. If they're playing on games, they might know what a smart TV is. Some of these other things, might know what a washing machine is, or a vacuum cleaner, or air conditioning. Everyone knows what an aircon is. They all have it in every single room, right? So these things, maybe they'll know what it is, but not the Thai. They'll know the Thai word, but not the English word, and vice versa. So depending on the situation, your students may or may not know. But because it's quite a lot, because you feel like your students are approaching level, what you might want to do is divide this up into 2 lessons instead of doing it all in one. So we'll do either half the everyday vocabulary, everyday technology in the first lesson, and the other half in here, or you could do all of it in one, and then just repeat all of it in lesson 2, right? And then we'll just put the describing technology and pair that into lesson 1, and operating technology into lesson 2, right? Now, honestly, it is quite like excessive with the amount of vocabulary words here. So if you know your students and you're still thinking, hold on, even if I divide that in between 2 lessons, that's still going to be quite a lot. Well, maybe then you want to expand it out a little bit again. All right. So you could do 3 lessons. Let's do vocab 1 over 3 lessons, and you'll do speaking language skill for 1, and then maybe do some reading or writing or listening, however you want to do it. And then you get them to practice those skills with these vocabulary words, rather than going to the extremes of giving them new information about AI and virtual reality, whereas they're just still trying to grasp these basic vocab words. So depending on the level of your students, if you feel like they're that lower level, then just spread this out over more classes, and if it's spread out over more classes, just include some of the language skills and practice language skills with these words. Particularly if you're teaching ICEP, so the English class for students who are doing it in the Thai language course, Thai language program, so they don't teach other languages other subjects in English, just English is in English and everything else is in Thai. You may feel like you need to take this kind of information and spread it out, and then really practice how to pronounce aluminium or aluminum, depending on where you're from, and so forth. Like, you get to say either, whatever. But maybe they're struggling with some other words like gold and so forth. So get them that time to actually practice some of that speaking skill or that listening skill with some of these words, and get them familiar with it. Okay, so spreading it out for extra lessons, nothing wrong with that. You can manage that by just practicing the language skills alongside it at the same time. Okay. Yeah, I've actually got so I've got the example lesson plans here. I'm not going to get time to look into it. You can have a bit of a look. I'll post them up online when I post the recording of this lesson plan, of this webinar. Now let's look at on level. Now, you may estimate that your on level students can complete all of this, right? All of this vocabulary in one lesson, as a lot of vocab everyday words and potentially familiar to them already. You still may opt to divide this into a couple of lessons, as was what we were saying before, depending on how you feel. Like, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. So instead of maybe talking about the AI intelligence podcast interview, you just recover this content while practicing the listening skill. Okay, so you could have some pre-recorded messages, or get like AI voice chats to mimic different voices to read out some of these words, or read out sentences with these words, and then they have to listen for the understanding of what they're what that what that phrase is all about. So maybe they're talking about a fan and a cooker and a dishwasher, and the students have to decipher which one the person was actually using and which one the person was thinking about. Did they turn it off or leave it on, sort of thing. So you can use that as a listening tool to actually reinforce these vocab words. Okay, so again, up to you how you want to interpret that. And just while I'm on the subject or thinking about this, so cooker, when you look at the actual BFITS slides, this is when we provide context into what they mean by these. So you could read the textbook as well, or you could just look at those BFITS slides that have all the vocabulary and all the grammar points. And this is what's supposed to cover. So it uses that word in context. It says whether it's a verb or a noun and so forth. In this case, a cooker is what I would call, personally, a stove. So maybe you want to introduce that concept of having different words for the same thing as well, depending on the level of your students and how you feel about that, and what you use at as normal speech for you as well. So that's a consideration to include. So just making sure you are still covering all of this. Don't take for granted that they're going to know what an air conditioner is, because maybe in Thai it's just air. So they just say air. So what's this conditioner thing? Something about air, and then for my hair, what's going on with conditioner? So don't take for granted that they may have some gaps. Okay? Continuing along, but beyond level students. So this is where seasons teachers have a lot of freedom to tailor unit content for their beyond level students' lessons. So they can play around with this a lot more. So a lot of prestigious schools will have students who basically know what all of these are. Maybe some things like sat nav, or maybe throwing smart in front of speaker, or maybe the word speaker or something like that. Maybe they don't understand. Maybe something like sockets they don't understand, but they'll probably understand like silver and glass and gold and stuff like that. So in your beyond level, they may still have some gaps, right? You can tailor the unit content as much as you like, for your beyond level students, and when you feel quite comfortable. There is benefit to following the textbook because it provides the structure, and just make sure you complete all of this content. You meet your objectives, right? The indicators usually have something that say you need to complete this, and the students have to have an understanding of this and that. So making sure you're meeting those indicators is a good way to do that, is to follow the textbook. Now you can add deeper meaning to your content, even if they know kind of most of this anyway. So a good example is actually doing interdisciplinary links. So you can actually link to other subjects as well. So you could actually have, say, give the students a budget of 100,000 baht, and then apply a certain number of baht costs to each of these items, and get them to choose, which ones are they going to fit out in their home? Why not? Are they going to choose the one that's gold, or are they going to choose the one that's normal, like metal or silver? And the differences there, different prices. Would require a little bit of setting up to write all that out, as a bit of a plan. But you could get AI to help you to write all that, or give me an estimated price in baht, blah blah blah. We're doing an activity for the students. ChatGPT can help you turn that hour-long lesson planning into 5 minutes sort of thing. So that can really help out as well. So maybe you want to do some social studies disciplinary link here. So instead of giving them 100,000 baht, you say, all right, you're helping out a family that's quite poor, like a new family. They've moved into a new an apartment together. They're having a child, and they want to be purchasing some of these everyday technologies. Which ones do you think the poor family should prioritize? So as they get their paychecks, which one are they going to buy first? Well, they probably want a cooker so they can cook for their family. And then they probably want a washing machine so that they can, do their clothes and so forth. We can probably hold off on the dishwasher because we can do that by hand. but maybe we want a fan to keep it cool because we don't want to pay for the air conditioning bill. Or, get them to think about that sort of thing. And maybe get them to think about, okay, well, if we've got a gold bit of technology, how does that compare to if you have something that's made out of plastic? There's plastic, yeah. So, like getting them to think about what the different materials potentially say about the quality of the item as well. Maybe you want to get them to think about that. So that's how you can sort of add some depth to your beyond level students' work, even if they already sort of know the content. So add extra meaning into it. But you're still practicing the same content. Don't steer away from this for Unit 6 just because you think they know it all. You still have to go over the content that's required, if that makes sense. Okay? All right. And then frequently asked questions part. So we've got a few little points here. How flexible can I be when interpreting the basic syllabus? So this is your core content. So usually like your English core, your science core, your math core, that sort of thing, ICT as well. Basically, the fundamental elements of each unit must be taught. As I was saying, don't just skip over it because you think they know it or whatever. You need to go over it. Yeah. So that could be vocabulary, it could be grammar, scientific concepts, math questions. For ICT, you've got like maybe bits of code or different things on the webs on code.org that you need to go over. Any specified language skills or problem-solving skills or calculation skills must also be taught. Basically, you have to teach what it says you have to teach. It's not too mind-blowing, but the order and the method of the teaching can be changed within the unit. So you might do things in a different order, particularly for some subjects that tend to be more flexible, like English. Science can be a little bit depending on which topic you're at. But like a math, usually you build your way up, in complexity, and same with ICT. So basically, you can have different activities. You can get them to work on this and that. Remember, with the language skills here, the language skills, reading, writing, listening, speaking, you don't have to cover the content necessarily that's from the textbook of that, but you do need to cover the language skill itself. You can't really vary much from the vocabulary, but the way you teach the vocabulary can be different, right? We're not saying, and we highly recommend not going over the BFITS slides, just saying, okay, this is a washing machine. Okay. Yeah, this is a toaster. This is it's boring. Get them to play around with it a little bit more. Get them some sort of activity or test them first, right? For a subject where they should potentially already have a lot of existing knowledge, you might want to just start with not necessarily a test, but some sort of way to get them to provide their understanding. One or two of my, maybe a couple of the example lesson plans actually go over that. So you get them to write down what they know first, then you fill in the gaps, tell them some more, and then you get them to practice that information after. So that way you can adjust it within the lesson as well. So that's another way to look at the lesson planning. Okay. Now, how flexible can I be when interpreting the additional syllabus? So the additional tends to be less specifics on what you need to do. So there's more flexibility in the way that you teach. So unless directions provided by the school or by your head teacher or BFITS, or you've got indicators you need to follow, or the BFITS academic team says you need to do this, you can essentially control the content. So usually it is some sort of problem solving. It is some sort of skill that they want to practice, or some way of thinking, or some practical way of applying what they've learned in the core subject. Basically, you can take what's been provided in masterclass and tailor it to your students and your teaching staff, if you just want to make it simple. But you could potentially do it in some other ways. You could get them ways to apply things in different fashions, and make some sort of project that they can work on that gets to prove that they understand what's sort of being talked about there. All right, so there is a lot more flexibility. You still need to go over those skills, those key points that are required. A couple last ones. I think this is the last one. I teach multiple subjects and year levels. How can I plan more efficiently? So if you're overwhelmed with the number of lessons you need to plan, take an approach that alleviates that pressure. So this is advice for teachers who maybe newer, don't have the time, or sort of being overwhelmed by all the things that are going on. So create a framework that looks like your lesson. So you've got a lesson plan, but do a copy and paste kind of thing from each lesson to the next. Apply it and keep applying it over and over. Keep copy pasting until you're comfortable with making some individual tailoring. So, for example, You can make all your do nows a riddle, or all your do nows just a review question from your previous lesson. So that way you don't have to come up with, oh, how can I introduce this new concept for this lesson every time, right? Just copy and paste. What did I do last lesson? Boom, paste it into the do now of this lesson. Make it easier on yourself until you feel comfortable enough to tailor it in more depth. Now, you can include 3 concept check questions for your I do stage, like as part, so you give them the information, here's some 3 concept check questions. Boom, I'll do that every time. Or for your exit ticket, you have 1 content question, so 1 question based on what they learned, and 2 reflection questions, or mixing it up. So whatever it is, stick with that, copy and paste every single time. Oh, new content, or I'll just change it slightly. That sort of thing. Really helpful for like additional subjects, maybe like a geography. Oh, we're doing this country, then we're doing this country. Well, I'll take all the same information. So like their flag, their land mass, their population size, historical landmarks, whatever, and then I'll just display that the exact same thing in the next one, but based on what that country has. So their language, their currency, all that same information, just repeat it, and then you do that for the next country, and so forth. So like, make it easier on yourself if you've got a lot of different subjects. Find a framework until you have it all planned out in advance, and you can tailor it more to be more exciting, more engaging. That's it for our time today anyway. If there's any questions and answers, feel free to stick back and we can have a bit of a chat. Don't want to go too much longer than initially planned. I will post those example lesson plans I have, so you can have a bit of a look at that if you're interested as well. Remember, you've got a lot of room. Make things easier for yourself by copying, or not copying, using what's available on BFITS resources, adjusting it slightly so it makes sense from the textbook and so forth, and then teach from there. Basically, thank you for joining. If you've got follow-up questions, you can email me, you can message me. The recording, all the links go on the BFITS training resources, Google Classroom. That's it. Thank you very much, everyone who joined live. I'll catch you next time.